I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Hello and welcome to the RANE podcast series. In this episode, founder of RANE, David Lawrence, sits down with Dr. Mark Gold about his recent article in Psychology Today titled, "What We Can Learn from Celebrity Addictions." Celebrity addiction cases have raised awareness and spurred treatment efforts over the years. This article stresses that addiction can affect anyone, regardless of fame or wealth, and that recovery can lead to remarkable turnarounds. Dr. Mark Gold is an author, inventor, mentor, and world-renowned expert on addiction-related diseases. He's had over 1,000 peer-reviewed publications since beginning his academic career at the University of Florida College of Medicine and Yale University School of Medicine in the 1970s. Dr. Gold has modernized addiction and psychiatric training, fellowship, and treatment programs while hopeful that research would translate into new, more effective treatments. Let's dive in. We hope you enjoy this episode.
You wrote I thought, a highly insightful and, quite frankly, brilliant article for Psychology Today, highlighting the issue of celebrity substance abuse and some of the lessons learned, the casualties along the way, et cetera. And, you know, we could spend hours upon hours about the people that we have lost. But maybe I could just start with a basic question. Why now for the article? What sort of incentivized you, inspired you?
So, thanks. When you're living in this point in time and listening to people, it just seems that we've forgotten these tragic lessons and we haven't listened to people who've made it to the other side. So, like now everybody's saying, well, what about cocaine? And I say, well, when did we learn about cocaine in the past? In the 1980s, it wasn't even considered an addicting drug. When did we learn it was addicting, and how did that insight come about? What reinforced that? And so you could go back in time and you'd say, well, we learned one dose of cocaine could kill you. You could be cocaine naive, not a drug taker, and die of an overdose. When Len Bias tragically died, basketball player with his future at the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, the number one or number two draft pick. And just, it was experimental, it was a one-off and a tragedy. Right. Exactly.
Or you'd say, if just to keep on the cocaine theme, you'd have, when did we learn about speedballing? John Belushi, like the dying of a speedballing. Chris Farley dying in a similar way. Or when did we learn? The Saturday Night Live had lots of cocaine jokes and lots of cocaine is safe illusions, but as a point of fact, it was really hard to get John Belushi to even finish Animal House without people watching him and taking care of him and keeping him going. Or you say, well, when did what did we learn from Whitney Houston? So I basically, like, here we are in an amphetamine era, coming back from an opioid era, the exact same things we went through in the 60s and 70s, and everybody's forgotten it. It's almost as if we had no suffering and no lessons from the deaths, and also have kind of minimized the successes. I mean, there are unbelievable role models out there. Like, why isn't everybody talking about Robert Downey Jr., who is like a wild and crazy drug-addicted person, according to him, with many years, if not decades, of polysubstance use, even heroin and cocaine. And I think he was arrested. He was put in jail. I mean, he was found in somebody else's house on a bed, not kind of knowing very much. And here, after being sentenced to almost a year in prison, he would be the person who's one of Hollywood's highest paid actors, best known, of course, for his work in the Marvel series, but he looks happy when you see him. Or Jamie Lee Curtis, who talks about her painkiller addiction and about how great it feels for her to be in recovery. Or even the newest kind of superstar, Bradley Cooper, who described his own alcohol abuse and alcoholism and was so upset with himself and what was become of himself each episode with diminished capacity, and with just anger at himself, turned everything around to be a great star. And you have even lesser, even in music, we have Eminem, who had a near-death experience, overdose, and treatment and recovery. And I admire his grit and determination. And really, if you read about his recovery, it's like he was training to be a Navy SEAL, for God's sakes. He initially replaced all of this drug dependence with exercise, but again, he looks happy and performing and helping other people, just like Elton John helped him. Again, an amazing success story. So I think I wrote the article because there are these great success stories, and there's these struggles, and then there are cases where it didn't work out like maybe it could have or should have, and there are lessons in all of these things, lessons that are relevant today.
So Mark, one of the points, and let me unwrap a couple things. It is amazing, and it's not just limited to substance use disorders. It has to do with so many of the human decisions we make in life about what we do and the risks we take. And Daniel Kahneman, who passed away about a little more than a year ago, the brilliant Nobel Prize winning, I'll call him a behavioral economist, who talked about the decisions that we make, and etc. The theme you are raising is a very interesting one, which is, basically, wait a second, haven't we been here before? Weren't there lessons that we learned? And why is it nobody seems to remember these lessons? Or if they do remember them, they seem to think, well, either this time it's different or it won't happen to me. And, you recited a incredible list. There are many more. You have Stephen King, for example, the author, and you also have Eric Clapton, if you want to go down the musical. Right, Keith Richards has been in a lifetime of recovery and relapses and things like that, and but still alive. And you have Tim McGraw, Steven Tyler. I'm just having memorized some of these things. And
No, and maybe what they all have in common is they didn't listen to Amy Winehouse, who said, right, they tried to make me go to rehab, and I said, no.
No, and it was a great effing song, right? But a tragic one. And Billy Joel. There are all these people who are out there, and who have actually been open about their issues. And then past year we lost the actor Matthew Perry, and etc. And the point you are making, which is a very good one, and I'm just not sure we've built the institution around preserving memories and explaining to people the lessons that we've learned, and having, it's not just the message, but the messengers. The list you've recited, and you referenced Eminem as well. These are people who are potentially very persuasive in the broader society, and yet their voices have not been captured, right, in the messages.
Well, we cover the overdoses, overcover them, and there's even a scientific paper looking at this, and we rarely cover the treatment and recovery more than just a mention. So this is it just people like car wrecks and the other hard work and Eminem's AA sobriety anniversary may be something that he puts on social media, or Elton John or others, but that's not anything that people cover. And even, you said it better than I did, but the reason I organized this around lessons was, well, what could be learned by this? So I'll take lesson 1 in this Psychology Today piece, and it was rehabilitation and long-term treatment can work. Well, that's a really important lesson. But I bet you if you think about it, you'll think about somebody where it didn't work. But it worked in a lot of people, and they've helped a lot of people. I mean, one of the amazing things that Elton John has done in Atlanta and elsewhere is help people get into treatment and long-term recovery. The same for other celebrities, but he's been outspoken about this, and I don't really, I don't know that that's covered. It sure is in Rocket Man, or people kind of know that, but they might not realize what a commitment it is to stay sober. But it's something that these people have actually done. Rehabilitation and treatment can work. Now, you could say, well, what is unlikely to work? And I would answer right away that it's unlikely to work: detox. So yes, Amy Winehouse might have been interested in detox, but no, there's really no evidence that detox itself is a treatment. It is it may be a first step, but all by itself, it's just getting off of drugs, or at least the drug you're the most attached to, one at a time. So we have like another example of detox not being a treatment might be something. Well, you could do Kurt Cobain, who was right before his death had an intervention and went to a detox-only rehab. And maybe people don't realize there are such things. Detox-only rehab, maybe they didn't feel it was necessary to ask him about his family history of depression. And he had a significant family history of depression, by the way, so significant that at a family reunion, one of his relatives died by suicide. He had significant trauma. Maybe a detox-only rehab doesn't ask about psychological trauma. And we say, well, what kind of trauma? Well, he discovered somebody who had hanged themselves to death in his town and reported it to the police and received counseling for that. He had been rescued because of opioid overdose with naloxone, Narcan, a number of times, and he had persistent depression, which ran in his family, which was an issue for him, and detox only would certainly not be something that is easy to recommend. You might. There are plenty of other cases of people who've chosen that.
Yeah, and I want to unwrap this, because rehab. Okay, one of the basic themes of your wonderful article was that rehab does work. There are a lot of factors that go into it. There are a lot of charlatans out there. I know from my work and listening closely to you and reading what you've written in the past, it is a commitment. It's a lifetime commitment. You cited Jamie Lee Curtis, for example, previously, and how she feels these days. She has not been reticent about talking about her commitment to this, and that when you're an addict, you never stop being an addict. It's this. So one of the important themes is obviously getting into the right hands with the right people And you're outlining that there can be a multitude of factors that underlie the addiction and the struggle to, basically get into recovery. And those have to be addressed as well. And I can remember, and if you asked me when it was, Mark, I would have, the passage of time, as you and I get older, time speeds up, as they say. Yeah, but Aaron Sorkin wrote the screenwriter and author, wrote I thought an extraordinary commentary when Philip Seymour Hoffman passed away.
Yes,
And it was
it's so
published.
funny you mentioned that.
Yeah, it was published in Time magazine. I'll have our editor David post it alongside this because I felt it was a complimentary piece to what you had written. But Aaron Sorkin also is someone who's been in recovery, and when he worked with Hoffman, they would have these mini AA meetings during the breaks and filmings. But I pulled it up, in preparation for our podcast, and I'll just read one paragraph from what Sorkin said. On breaks during rehearsals, we would sometimes slip outside our sound stage on the Paramount lot and get to swapping stories. It's not unusual to have these mini AA meetings. People like us are the only ones to whom tales of insanity don't sound insane. Yeah, I used to do that, I told him. I felt lucky because I'm squeamish and can't handle needles. He told me to stay squeamish. And he said this: if one of us dies of an overdose, probably 10 people who were about to won't. He meant that our deaths would make news and maybe scare someone clean. And so, just to get back to the point of lessons learned, it's not just the lessons about the people who have successfully gone into recovery and remain in recovery for the rest of their lives, but it's the failures. And I don't think, there was probably no more of a gifted actor and an intelligent individual than Hoffman. And he lost his battle, and we lost a tremendous asset to our society. And yet those lessons, I don't think are conveyed. And when I read something like Sorkin, Sorkin's a great messenger because he writes with such eloquence. Isn't there a need to somehow institutionalize, to bring this all together so that people are not only getting the message, but they're getting the message from some great messengers that are out there? Such as yourself.
No.
Okay.
I thought about Philip Seymour Hoffman and what lesson he should be, and thought about it for a long time and made him lesson number 2. And the lesson is just that addiction is acquired, that it then becomes lifelong, chronic, and relapsing. Now, in his case, he entered rehab as a young man, I'd say in his early 20s, and he stayed clean and sober for 23 years. After that, he relapsed, and his wife couldn't handle it, and he couldn't handle it, and he didn't want to be clean and sober, and fought to not enter treatment again. And I think he either rented an apartment or bought one in the same building or near her. It's just, I think that the notion of prevention, that was the other competing idea. I said, maybe I should use him as an example of prevention, because as he was saying in the Sorkin, through Sorkin, stay squeamish. Learning how to use drugs is not like going to college or trade school. You learn things that undermine your ability to survive. Anytime you're thinking about drugs and someone says to you, this drug inhibits your appetite, or this drug makes you less interested in sex or survival, you go that's a drug that's going to change the person over time. so that they're become on the other end a different person, not in a way of increasing your chances of survival, but decreasing it. Anyway, most of the I have never in the professional literature, rarely are cases discussed like this, and in the public press, I think again most of the attention is on the death, like the coroner's report, and the analysis of the coroner's report. And it's so much so that when a celebrity dies, there are 4 or 5 people like me that newspapers call up and ask, well, what do you think? And what do you think about the coroner's will show? And if they have the coroner report, they'll ask you to comment on it. So, it's really Matthew Perry's death was a recent event. And, I've written about ketamine use disorder and that it's a drug that can cause an addiction to ketamine. Matthew Perry himself was being treated for a substance use disorder, as evidenced by his autopsy showing that he was taking Suboxone. And we don't really know whether ketamine is safe for even depression in people with coexisting substance use disorder, and then certainly not the number of times and the use by himself, self-administered use, and then in a hot tub, all of which was just tragic. So I do think we know so much about the deaths because they're overcovered and the treatment and recovery is undercovered. Like, how many people really have covered Samuel L. Jackson and how he got clean and sober from cocaine in the 90s and has stayed that way, and always spoken about the importance of prevention, and if prevention fails, early intervention. It just must be, like you said, a quirk of the human consciousness to focus on the train wreck.
And of course, it's what sells newspapers. I use that term, whatever passes for newspapers these days, right? Online stories and, videos. And I wanted to mention just to the audience, and obviously patient confidentiality prevents you from going into this, but for the audience's benefit, Mark has been directly and by one degree of separation involved in helping so many of these celebrities, but ordinary people, get into recovery and to address the issues involved in their
Well, it's
addiction.
due to people like you. I mean, so like people call and they it's just one of these really interesting things about my expertise, and also everyone who works in my field knows this. It's at the point in time when the person's relationship to the drug is greater than their attachment to other people, loved ones. That's when it's almost impossible to get them help. And in the state of Florida, we have involuntary commitment for that reason. We can put somebody in a treatment program, get them an evaluation and treatment, and then go to a judge and tell them that they're so hopelessly addicted that there's no way that they can choose anything other than addiction, continued use, and that without involuntary treatment, they'd be likely to die. And I think that's really a great, it is a great thing, this Marchman Act, which we use infrequently in Florida, but it's come up a number of times where it's saved lives.
Right. It's
And
the analog in other states. Basically, it's involuntary commitment.
for the mentally ill, like
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you think about it, it's really how David Crosby got clean and sober.
Well, I actually want to go through this because it's important. We're obviously going to post your wonderful article, but beyond the fact that you mention a variety of specific names and people who have been successful, you are also beyond the fact of long-term treatment can work. The other points that I know we've referenced them before in other podcasts, but I think it's worth emphasizing is to understand that this is a chronic disease. It is a lifetime disease, and it's susceptible to relapses. And so when people do relapse, it is not necessarily a failure. It goes with the disease, the same way that cancer goes into remission, it comes back. People have a second heart attack, etc. But it's important, and you make that point very eloquently around Philip Seymour Hoffman and his struggles. You also talk about treating not only substance use disorders as drug issues, but also what is right to say co-occurring conditions, everything from depression and anxiety and other types of things that can go with it and get exacerbated by the drugs, or maybe one thing leads to self-medication and people feel better for a while, et cetera. But you make that point very succinctly and eloquently about the underlying conditions. The fact that you have to remind people that cocaine is one of the most disruptive, addicting drugs. I mean, like, Mark, at some point you and I are going to go. We're going to go.
I should write my memoir.
No, we'll go on the preacher circuit, and we'll just read from the book of Ecclesiastes that it's all been said and done before. There's nothing new under the sun, right?
There's something to that. But you're in New York, and they always are talking about closing Rikers, and I think David Crosby was in Rikers. He detoxed in Rikers.
He was in many, many places, and David Crosby, just not that the audience needs to be reminded, David Crosby was the lead singer-writer in Crosby, Stills and Nash, became Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, one of the most acclaimed rock and roll bands for their creativity. Previously, I believe he was with Buffalo Springfield, he and Stephen Stills, but it was interesting. He developed a terrible series of addictions, and even his bandmates did not know what to do. Okay, I apologize. I said Buffalo Springfield. I think that was Stephen Stills. It was with the Birds with a Y, folks. If you got to look it up, but cocaine and other things, and it was time after time after time. And you make the point very eloquently that his recovery, and he acknowledged it, his recovery was, his life was saved by a prison sentence in Texas.
The judge sentenced him, then he petitioned to say could he get treatment, and they said yes. Then he got to treatment, and of course he eloped, and then he gets rearrested, and basically, like, the thing the lesson, of course, is that he, and then you could even think the same thing for others who who the court facilitated their treatment. In his case, his detox was in jail, and he got his life together. He said, I haven't used drugs. He died in 2023, and he said he hadn't used drugs since 85 or 86 after I was arrested. And honestly, it's just such a complicated, multifactorial, who knows why you start, but one thing for certain is drugs stimulate their own taking. Drugs change the person taking them, so that priorities that you once had and an identity that you once had are modified slowly over time. You hardly know it. No one can really tell you the day in their life they became addicted. It's a slow, insidious process. And then once it happens, as experts often say, it's a process where a cucumber becomes a pickle, and going backwards is a different story. It's very difficult, if not impossible, oftentimes for them to conceive of not using drugs. You bring up one point that I just want to say about treatment, and that is, in addiction, the person has a very important role. The treatment has a role, but if you think about it, we can't really, it's not like treating strep throat, where we can give you penicillin almost against your will and cure you. The person doesn't have to say, I agree to be cured. The person doesn't have to say, I agree I'm powerless over drugs. I agree that when I use drugs, things happen, and they happen in a rapid, progressive manner that will likely undermine my survival. So therefore, I won't use drugs. And if I need help not using drugs, I'll turn to my doctor, to my AA group, to my sponsor, but I'm just not going to use drugs today. It's the combination of medical, like evaluation, detox, treat the comorbidity, and spiritual and recovery-based. All of that makes rehab work. One without the other, it doesn't work that well. And without the person, it doesn't work at all. Chris Farley would be the best example I can give, and I can't remember how many times he went to rehab. His brother continuously tried to help him, who was a motor company executive, and I'd say he was in rehab way over 10 times, some between 10 and 20 times, and each time he pretty much started using shortly thereafter, being in treatment. So it's not like something where you could just go. It's not like being there is going to be a treatment. It's that things have to happen, like they did for Jamie Lee Curtis, or they did for Robert Downey, or Samuel L. Jackson, or the list goes on. It's work, and I think it's really possible, but it's not something that can happen if you're just expecting it to happen to you.
The way I've always come to think of it, as a result of learning from you, Mark, is it's not necessarily formulaic, okay? And it's certainly not a light switch that you turn on and turn off. And the importance of people being in the right hands, as opposed to, checking into the luxury suites off some Pacific coast. No, I'm not trying to point fingers or to, that there's a spiritual guru, or that there's some kind of, natural elixir that does this. It is a hard process. It's a hard process to find what works. And at times, as you've pointed out with David Crosby, but with others, sometimes it is about, not allowing the person out on the streets where they can do harm to themselves, where there is a forced, effort of abstinence and detoxification, and so the mind can clear, and maybe the component that you're reciting to, which is the person himself or herself, can take hold and gain enough sanity to overcome the insanity. And I just want to go through a couple points.
No, I agree. I was going to say, I learned a lot. We all learn a lot from people with these problems. I learned a lot from Mrs. Ford. So I was very active in the Betty Ford. I was on the philanthropic board and spoke at Betty Ford Center probably 10 times, and knew the medical directors. And she used to have the Betty Ford room, which was multiple people in a room, no private suites. And people would leave the program because you had to make your own bed up. So, it was the men and women weren't allowed in the same space.
Let me just put some context because, Mark, there's a much younger audience that also listens to this. Betty Ford was the wife of President Ford, and she suffered her issues involving substance use disorders, addictions, very much in public, okay? And in those days, this was a scandal, right, that she had allowed herself, I'll use that term, allowed herself to become addicted, and then, the issues involving President Ford's political career, and then, of course, her devotion to this and her dedication and how she came out at the other end. You have something called the Betty Ford Clinic, which is one of the preeminent institutions for dealing with addiction issues. People may not recognize.
Oh yeah, it was one of the first.
Yeah.
I think I was at the opening I'm going to say it's 83, 84. Originally, they didn't even do detox. That's how important they thought detox was to ultimate treatment and recovery. They didn't even do it. Just turned out that it was easier and more efficient to do it in the same place. But we had the same thing. Recently, Kitty Dukakis died, and she was another wife of a really famous politician, the governor of Massachusetts, presidential candidate. And she, early on, was given prescription amphetamines, as was the case back then in the day, for weight loss and weight maintenance, and over time became dependent and used it for all other sorts of things. And she too became a voice for treatment and recovery, but more recently it was covered in the Times and elsewhere for advocacy for treating dual disorders, the comorbidity like you spoke about, because she had severe depression, even not taking drugs, not taking alcohol. She was depressed and even was failed at treatment with antidepressants and was treated with electroconvulsive therapy, shock treatments, and became a spokesperson for the National NAMI, the Organization of Advocacy for the Mentally Ill. And she was a very vocal supporter of treatment of depression. We think about her at this time and her family, and just how heroic she too was, and how her example of treating both the substance use disorder and the psychiatric problem to get complete, for her that was the answer that unlocked everything that she was hoping for in her life, and I'm glad for that much.
So I want to go through in the few minutes we have the additional lessons that you point to in the article, because some of them are self-evident, but as you said, they've been self-evident for a while. Let's not overlook the obvious, but obviously the mixture of different types of drugs, polydrug use, as you refer to it, is more dangerous than using one single substance. The fact that you say, like, tomorrow may be too late. There are many people who pick up, and particularly in this day of adulterated drugs, and where fentanyl is put in and other things are put in, the notion, and I say this to people who have friends who are struggling or loved ones who are struggling, the importance of not waiting and acting as quickly as possible, because as you point out, I think you used the example of Prince, who was administered Narcan and went to the hospital, and he checked himself out, and a couple of days later he was dead from an overdose.
In his case is something that you hear all the time from families, and
Right.
Really, they had he had an appointment with an addiction specialist the day after he died. They had made an appointment, and that he and his handlers decided that tomorrow there wasn't a threat to tomorrow, but you do never know.
Okay. And I'm going to go back to Sorkin, and then I want to jump into something which is my personal pet peeve, and you and I have discussed it. But Sorkin, I think, in the towards the end of his obituary on Hoffman, mentions something which the point you make. He says he didn't die because he was partying too hard or because he was depressed. He died because he was an addict on a day of the week with a Y in it. And to your point that this is a lifetime thing, and tomorrow may be too late, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think
day.
like if you're a person who loves someone or knows someone who's in recovery, we should celebrate the fact that they're going to meetings, not say when you're going to be cured and don't need to go to meetings anymore.
Right.
Like this kind of active prevention, keeping it current, and being humble in the face of this life-threatening chronic relapsing disease is amazing. And people, millions of people are going to AA and NA meetings every day with the sole purpose of trying to stay sober and prevent some catastrophe.
Right. And so the stigma away, but this notion that these are generally, when you see these issues and somebody, put it this way, is closer to the drug than they are to their family or to their other previous priorities, this is not a waiting game. It doesn't take care of itself, and there are some very, very significant risks. All right, I just want to turn, because you focused on celebrities, and many of them come out of Hollywood, and they're open about it and such, and it's about the people who kind of show the way because they have been able to be successful in recovery, and then there are the lessons of the people that we've lost along the way. What I continue to find in, we'll call it the consumption of movies and TV shows, et cetera, is that there continues to be, and I don't want to sound like either Nancy Reagan used to sound this way, and Tipper Gore, et cetera, but there continues to be sort of a glamour that gets associated with watching drug use, occasional drug use, and in fact, there have been a number of, I'll call them sophomoric films about adolescents. Okay, there's nothing funnier than adolescents making their way through life. Okay, and dealing with drugs and watching them get high and get stupid and say stupid things, again, to stupid situations. And the point, that I have taken away from so much of what you said is that, like, guys, this is serious. This is serious business, and it only takes one instance. And the pole that you grab onto is very slippery. You can descend very quickly on it. And yet, this continues. I'm just curious whether you could share some thoughts about how this gets conveyed.
I know. Yeah. So, a couple of things. The DEA had this "one pill can kill" campaign, and one pill can kill. Even Prince was killed really by having fentanyl when he didn't think it was fentanyl. It's just this kind of Russian roulette of so many of the bootleg pills containing fentanyl. It's frightening for everyone. To make the celebrity endorsements for drug and drug taking is the principal mass advertising for drugs of abuse, which is just a huge cartel-driven industry. Even when it's something like a half-baked or a marijuana film, you're going like, well, we can't hardly, even in the states with legal cannabis shops, they can't, don't appear to be able to compete with the same old cannabis dealers all over the place. We've only just increased the number of suppliers. So there's controlling that, I don't know. Maybe I've looked at the good news on this, which is that year over year, over the last, and I think it's accelerated over the last 5 years, but the trend could be seen for 10. The number of high school seniors with no substance use whatsoever has increased year after year. And it's now something like, I don't have the data in my hand, but let's say it's 25% have absolutely no use whatsoever of anything. It's a complete, it's like the younger people are seeing older people and not liking what they see, and increasingly.
So that is that part of the secret sauce, Mark?
Isn't it funny? That's a Mark Gold way of looking at things, which is like, it isn't. You have to try to help keep the people alive that are going to have this bootleg pill and die. So we need interdiction. We need prevention. We need education. For the people who develop early problems, what we have to do is diagnose pre-addiction, just like we have pre-diabetes. We have to intervene. We have to get them good treatment, and we have to allow them to stay in treatment forever, if not for long periods of time. There's a lot of things that we do that reduce the harm, but long term, it's likely that the people of the 60s have made the younger generation suspicious, and that each generation may be more suspicious of the drugs of their parents and grandparents. However, there are always new drugs. I mean, my generation, we wouldn't have even thought about ketamine as a drug of abuse, where today that might be party drug and drug of abuse, like cocaine was in the 70s and 80s.
So you hit on something, which is there are a significant number of people who are, how should I say, they're celebrating the sort of the abstinence of liquor and drugs.
Yeah. The California sober movement.
Sober movement, right? And so,
yeah,
but
with,
still,
it's just the human nature. You can't expect things to be covered like you and I are trying to cover them, and I'm grateful to you and RANE for giving me the chance to help improve the overall education related to these things. But even among my colleagues, we're always hopeful that there's going to be a new drug that won't have any side effects, won't be addicting, and will cure the basic problems of daily living.
So Mark, first of all, thank you again for the article. We're going to post it. We'll post Sorkin's piece. I do want to, maybe in a future podcast, we'll get into some of the other substances that people are using these days to enhance performance. I'll use that term loosely, which I think is important, has all sorts of implications for a variety of business and sectors and government branches and things like that, and dealing with the ability to I guess it's to perform at the highest level for the longest period of time in order to acquit yourself well or to get ahead, etc. So we'll delve into that because it's a lot there. I will say I would also like to explore, because again, if you deal with people who have lost children along the way, which we have, there are some very, very funny movies. I'll admit they're funny, okay? And this is not to point a finger, but in which teenagers, adolescents are caught up in situations where they're high or they're addicted or whatever, and it's very, very funny. And one can easily walk out of that movie and say, that was a great film, I laughed a lot, I got to see that again. And the message that gets lost is the one that you are very much an advocate of, which is that, it doesn't take much before you lose someone. And, these people, you don't see them on the downside of this. So we can chat about that. Yeah, and you've been, again, I'll remind the people who are listening to this, Mark really has been either directly involved or one degree brought in to some of the most important matters, many of which had successful outcomes. Some did not, notwithstanding the best efforts of Mark and a number of other experts around the individual. So keep up the good fight, Mark. And we do have to figure out, how to sort of maintain institutional and broad societal memory about the lessons learned from recovery and the lessons learned from, the loss of life. So.
Well, thanks again, and again, it's just really nice of you to give me this chance to get the word out. Appreciate it.
Well,
Have a
thank you
good
for
week.
keep fighting, Mark. Okay. All right. Thanks again. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out Dr. Mark Gold's full bio and host of written publications at the link in the episode description. Want more RANE content? Subscribe to the RANE podcast series today, available on all platforms, or visit our website at ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com.